The Ellery Maritime lobby hummed with the usual Monday morning rush. Margot crossed the marble floor flanked by board members, her heels clicking sharply. She was cold, irritated, and entirely unprepared for the man waiting there. A contractor stood quietly near the security desk. Gray polo, clipboard, and quiet eyes. She stopped 3 feet away, tilting her head with a sharp, cutting smile, expecting to easily rattle him. "So when was your last date?" Her board members smirked, expecting entertainment. He locked eyes with her. "1 second, too. Right now with you." Absolute silence. Nobody dared move. For once, Margot was completely speechless. She brushed past him toward the elevators, her stunned board members trailing right behind her. The doors closed. The ride up to the 18th floor was completely silent. She ignored the brass numbers ticking up above the door. Staring at her reflection, she barely recognized the flushed woman looking back at her. Her assistant stood up the moment she walked through the doors. Margot brushed past her, slipped into her office, and shut the door, her hands trembling slightly on the cold metal handle. She grabbed the phone. "Diane, get me the file on that contractor in the lobby." Around 40, gray polo shirt, carrying a clipboard. "Probably building operations. I want that file on my desk in 15 minutes. 20 minutes later, the head of human resources knocked on her door. Miss Ellery, we don't have a Hudson Vale on our payroll." Margot looked up, intrigued. "Who is he then?" Diane laid down a single sheet. "He is a high-level contractor. Joanna Reeve authorized his security access 3 weeks ago. The order says operational audit for the Whitewater integration pre-clearance." She read it twice. Whitewater, the massive acquisition she had chased for 6 months. The one deal she could never close. It was the obsession that occupied her mind every single morning. "Thank you, Diane." The door clicked shut behind her. Margot sat in absolute silence for a long, heavy minute. Then she rose, marched out of her office, and headed straight down the corridor to legal. Joanna Reeve sat reviewing a contract, her glasses on. She did not even look up. "You have something to ask. I have a contractor in my lobby who knows things he shouldn't." Joanna laid the document down, slowly took off her glasses and folded them up. "He has full clearance to be here, Margot. I personally signed for it. I cannot say anything more right now." "Why not?" "Because I simply cannot." "Please hear me. I cannot tell you. Not I will not. There is a difference." Margot locked eyes with her. Joanna did not blink. "When can you?" "Soon." That was all. Margot walked back to her desk and worked until 7. At 7, she finally rode the elevator back down to the ground floor. The lobby was almost empty. The guard gave a polite nod as she passed. Hudson was nowhere to be seen near the desk. She ventured down the service corridor behind the elevators, passing the heavy freight door. She found him in the mechanical room, sleeves rolled up, a small flashlight clipped to his collar. He was reading the air controller and recording numbers. He clearly heard her approach. He didn't turn around. "Who are you, really?" "Just doing exactly what my clearance permits." "You can call security." "I am not going to call security, I know." She stood there for 30 seconds. He kept working. The fluorescent light buzzed quietly above. Walking away, she realized she was holding her own clipboard in a tight, nervous grip. She did not even remember picking it up. 2 floors down in the dim parking garage, Roland Pace leaned on a dark sedan, his phone pressed to his ear. 4 more weeks. If this Whitewater deal falls through, I will have the votes. She will be gone. He ended the call, smiling into the empty garage. Tuesday morning, Margot sat at her desk long before the sun rose. Sleep had completely eluded her. She opened the building security portal, a system she rarely touched. She had her own keys, her own access cards, and her own illusions of total control over her building. She entered the contractor login code Diane had passed along. She filtered the history for the past 3 weeks, and the log flooded her screen. Hudson Vale had accessed the 19th floor server room 7 different times. That room was strictly off-limits, reserved only for top tech leaders and herself. Even her chief financial officer did not possess clearance to step inside. Every single entry was countersigned by Joanna Reeve. He had also entered the 19th floor boardroom 4 separate times. 3 visits occurred past midnight, with 1 clocked at 2:14 in the morning. Hudson had also swept through the 17th floor legal contracts archive 6 times. He averaged 40 minutes of quiet, uninterrupted access during every single visit. The logs tracked him unlocking sensitive files, Whitewater, coastline, port authority records, and executive compensation. She read every line twice, her coffee freezing on her desk. Lifting her receiver, she dialed Joanna and quietly ordered her to come upstairs. Joanna arrived in 5 minutes. Margot locked the door. "Joanna, he has deeper access to this building than I do. Explain this to me." Joanna hesitated, letting a heavy silence stretch out. When she finally spoke, her voice dropped to a whisper. "There are some people whose empires you do not simply buy, Margot. They choose to be bought. And they only agree after studying you closely enough to know exactly who they are dealing with." Margot felt her throat constrict, unable to find her voice for nearly a minute. Retreating to her keyboard, she opened a highly secure private browser tab. She searched for Hudson Vale in the federal financial databases, but found absolutely nothing. Next, she tried the military registries, service records sealed under the Office of Naval Intelligence. She slowly leaned back in her chair. The mysterious man she had tried to mock in her lobby in front of 2 board members was no mere contractor. He was no simple technician and certainly not some low-level employee. He actually owned the very prize she was pursuing. Slowly, she shut her laptop. Stepping to the window, she watched the harbor lying cold and still in the dawn. A massive cargo vessel was gliding out toward the boundless ocean. Exactly the type of ship her coveted acquisition would have granted her the power to track. She grabbed the handset, dropped it, and then reached for it once more. Letting it clatter back down, she realized she had no idea who to even call. Security, Joanna, or her late father, who had been gone 9 years and always knew the way forward. She rode the elevator down to the quiet lobby. The security desk stood abandoned. Finding the heavy mechanical room door unlocked, she gave it a firm push. The massive air unit was perfectly sealed, all equipment cleared. The space was immaculate. Resting on the workbench right where his flashlight had sat, a single folded note remained. Unfolding it, she read the handwritten script on the card: "Hudson Vale, Whitewater Systems. Call when you are ready to speak as equals," his note read, followed by a phone number. She refused to call, simply folding the card and tucking it away. She retreated to the elevator, keeping her eyes strictly ahead as she left the building. On Friday afternoon, the elementary school bell rang at 3:15. Margot sat waiting in the carpool line 10 minutes early, her phone face down beside her. She had cleared a 40-minute slot on her schedule under a generic personal label. Nobody at her company had any idea she was raising a 6-year-old. Wynne was her sister Caroline's daughter, who had passed away over 2 years and 4 months ago. Lawyers had quietly finalized the custody agreement behind closed doors. Margot never placed a photograph of Wynne on her executive desk. In fact, no trace of her family existed in her office. She was taught early to keep business separate from her private pain. Then he parked, walked across the grass toward the playground, and her heart skipped as she spotted him. Hudson was kneeling in the dirt, completely focused on a sweet little girl in a yellow sweater and glasses. She was showing him a colorful drawing of a massive cargo ship docking, complete with tight bowlines and a giant crane hoisting up a container. "This crane right here," Hudson asked gently. "Did you draw it from looking or thinking?" "From looking," the girl answered, "at your workshop last Sunday." "What kind of looking?" She paused to think. "The kind where you wait." He nodded, treating her simple words with more respect than she ever saw in boardrooms. Margot stood 10 meters back on the path, entirely frozen in place. She quietly observed the man from her lobby, the one with the classified military record. The very man who could deny her his company was now laughing tenderly at his daughter's joke. It was not the hollow laugh of a businessman. He laughed like a man who had survived tragedy to build a genuinely beautiful, honest life. Suddenly, Wynne raced across the lawn and grabbed her hand tight. "Aunt Margot, you came." Hearing the name, Poppy looked over and waved warmly. The girls shared a first-grade class, a truth Margot had completely missed. Hudson followed his daughter's gaze until his eyes locked onto Margot. A brief, heavy silence stretched between them for just a heartbeat. He showed no shock, offered no nod, and did not pretend they were strangers. He simply stood, brushed off his knee, took Poppy's hand, and said, "Come on, kiddo." They walked to the exit, and he never once looked back. Margot squeezed the little girl's hand much tighter than she intended. Halfway home, Wynne looked over and asked, "Aunt Margot, are you holding your breath?" Keeping silent, she slowly let the air slip through her nose. Later that night, once Wynne was finally bathed and fast asleep, sitting alone at her Trad Street kitchen table, she placed his small white card right before her. The card carried his phone number, yet she resisted calling. She flipped it face down on the wood and walked away. 5 minutes later, she returned to flip it over, memorizing his digits all over again. She flipped it down, then up, repeating the nervous cycle 3 times. Finally, she went to bed, staring into the dark, still resisting the urge to call. Monday morning brought an emergency board meeting at 8:30. Roland Pace had demanded it Sunday night via an urgent email marked Whitewater. 7 board members gathered on the 19th floor, their expensive coffee going cold in the tense room. Roland cut straight to the chase, demanding a formal review of her performance in 21 days. If the Whitewater buyout wasn't finalized by then, that review would turn into a direct vote on her future. Absolute silence. Margot didn't flinch. She had 3 secure votes. 2 sided with Roland, while the last 2 were cautious veterans still sitting on the fence. Survival required 4 votes, but she only had 3. The countdown had officially begun. The meeting ended, and Roland cornered her in the corridor, keeping his voice deceptively low. He never yelled, "Margot, listen to me. Whitewater is a tiny startup. If you can't force their price down, let me take over. I have connections." "What connections, Roland?" He flashed the same cold smile he wore at her father's funeral. "Just connections." She politely dismissed his fake concern and walked back to her office. 20 minutes later, Joanna slipped in and shut the door. "Roland has secretly met with the Whitewater finance chief's rep twice this month. Neither talk was on the schedule. Neither went through legal." Margot leaned back, absorbing the blow. The picture was clearing up, and it was ugly. Roland wanted this deal dead on her terms. He wanted her fired so he could close the deal his way, pocketing the profit. She thought of Hudson downstairs, the building access logs, and the mysterious card in her pocket. Finally, she understood exactly what Hudson was waiting for. He wasn't waiting to see if she acquired Whitewater. He was waiting to see what kind of leader would be left standing when the dust settled. She rode the elevator down to the ground floor at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Walking down the East Hall, she found Hudson standing by the emergency stairwell door, testing the magnetic sensor with a small handheld device. As he noted the readings, she placed the white card face up on the door bar near his hand. She didn't hide it. "I didn't call," she said. "I came directly." He didn't look up immediately, only replying, "I know. You know Roland is meeting your contacts. I know, and you aren't stopping him." "I am watching." "Watching for what?" He set his meter down and turned. He looked at her exactly like he had in the lobby, with that same steady, completely unapologetic gaze. "I'm waiting to see if you are really the woman I saw in the lobby that day." She remained silent. Turning away, she walked back, took the elevator up to the 18th floor, and shut her heavy office door for the first time in months. She forgot about the hostile board. She forgot about Roland's schemes. She ignored the complex financial models blinking on her secondary screen. Instead, she pictured a little girl in a pale yellow sweater, sitting on the grass with a drawing of a cargo ship, explaining to her father what real waiting meant. She had no idea how to handle that sudden warm feeling, so she sat quietly with it until Saturday morning. Margot drove east across the Ravenel Bridge, surrounded by total silence and rolled-up windows. Beside her on the passenger seat lay the white card, showing a handwritten address for a small, quiet warehouse located at the very end of Shem Creek Marina. She pulled onto the gravel. 2 half-sanded, primer gray fishing boats rested on trailers just outside the building. A salty breeze swept off the water. The warehouse door stood open 6 inches, so she pushed it open. I found Hudson inside, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, his hands stained dark with engine grease as he leaned over an outboard motor. Little Poppy sat at a low wooden table in the corner, drawing in her sketchbook. The girl did not look up when I entered, but Hudson did, studying me. He was not surprised. "You found it," he said. "I came to ask one question." He nodded once, gesturing to a wooden chair by the workbench. I sat down. Silent Poppy walked over and set a small cup of warm water before me. She walked back to her sketchbook and resumed drawing. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. "Why did you say that?" He set down the rag he was using to clean a wrench. He paused to think before answering. The shop smelled of marine oil and clean wood. Because I have been watching you for 4 weeks, I saw you work 14 hours a day. I saw you treat the janitors with more respect than your own board. And I saw you alone in a way I recognized, because I have been alone for 3 years. He paused. I did not plan to say it. You asked first, so I answered honestly. I fell silent for a long moment, my eyes drifting to Poppy. Her tongue peeked out between her teeth, the way children do when a drawing really matters. Your wife? He nodded once. Mara, a car accident on Interstate 26. Poppy was only 5. I did not offer a hollow apology. He had heard those words enough to know what was genuine and what was just habit. I simply nodded and he nodded back. Eventually I stood up, setting my cup down without making a sound. As I walked toward the door, Poppy finally looked up at me. You are Wynn's aunt, she said. He told me you make boat-shaped pancakes. I smiled, a genuine one that surprised me. That is true, I admitted. Poppy considered my answer, nodded with satisfaction, and returned to her drawing. I drove back across the bridge with the windows rolled down. The wind smelled of salt, creosote, and marsh mud. I left the radio off. That night, from his apartment on the King Street side of downtown, Roland Pace sent an email to all 7 board members. The subject line read, Calendar Accelerated, Special Meeting Wednesday. His message proposed advancing the executive review vote from 21 days down to 4. The reason given was new material developments warranting immediate consideration. I read the email in bed at 11:40 p.m. I did not reply and I did not sleep. Just before 9 on Monday morning, Joanna knocked once and let herself into my office. She closed the door behind her, holding a plain manila envelope in her hand. She dropped it onto my desk and sat down opposite me without waiting for an invitation. The mutual non-disclosure agreement between Whitewater and Ellery expired at midnight. I can speak now. I stared at the envelope. I did not touch it. Speak. Joanna slid it open herself. She pulled out 3 documents and laid them across my desk like a hand of cards. The first was a private consulting contract between Roland Pace and a Delaware shell company called Coastline Holdings. The agreement paid Roland a consulting fee of $12 million, payable once an unnamed maritime cybersecurity acquisition closed. The second document was a memo. Coastline had approached Whitewater's financial representative twice over the past 4 weeks. Their offer was 38% below Ellery's standing bid. Their term sheet included a clause to resell Whitewater to Ellery 6 months later, closing at the original Ellery bid price minus the $12 million Coastline wanted for consulting fees. The third was an internal access log from our server room on the 19th floor. The security badge belonged to a junior information technology analyst, Marvin Chen, fired the previous month for falsifying timesheets. The records showed Marvin using his credentials to access the Whitewater valuation model at 1:47 in the morning, 3 days after he was escorted from the building. Margot stared at the page, reading it twice. Roland used a deactivated badge to steal our internal valuation model. Then he used those stolen numbers to tell Coastline exactly how low to bid. Yes, and Hudson found this during his 2nd week, in the server room. He held this for a month. Margot tensed, realizing he could have bypassed her to the board. He could have easily ruined Roland's career. Instead, he chose to protect her. Why? Joanna folded her hands. He wanted to know if you would uncover it yourself. Or failing that, if you deserved his loyalty. Margot felt her cold exterior begin to crack. She stood up immediately, leaving her office without even grabbing her jacket. Heading down to the lobby, she found it buzzing with the late morning shift change. There he was, Hudson, signing for a box of components, no corporate pretense, just honest work. She walked straight up to the desk and slid the photocopy of the contract onto the counter. I know what you did. He glanced down, then looked up with that calm, unreadable face. What will you do? I am taking this to the board before Roland's vote on Wednesday. Hudson nodded slowly. You need more than just a contract. I already have the server logs. He used a fired employee's credentials. That is not just a corporate policy breach. That is a federal computer fraud charge. Are you going to give them to me? They are already with your legal counsel. She has had them since 7 this morning. Margot did not ask why he went to Joanna first. She finally understood his silent test. She understood his caution. Why did you decide to hand them over to me? He thought about it. then answered her with quiet sincerity. Because you came to my workshop, and you actually cared about more than stock prices. She turned to leave. At the revolving door she stopped, her heart racing for him. Thank you, she whispered. He was silent, but she didn't need a reply. Wednesday morning. 9:14. The 19th floor boardroom filled in the slow, dragging way it always did. Coffee, mindless small talk, and the rustle of paper agendas nobody actually read. 7 corporate directors took their seats. Roland Pace sat smugly at the far end of the table, hands folded over his portfolio. Margot stood tall and calm. She walked to the head of the room, plugged her laptop in, and waited for the screen to wake. She did not offer a defensive speech. She opened with cold, hard facts. The first slide displayed the organizational chart of Coastline Holdings, registered in Delaware. 2 layers of shell entities, with controlling interest traced through a Cayman partnership back to one owner. An arrow pointed from that name to a small photo at the top of the chart. It was Roland Pace. The room went dead silent. The second slide showed the consulting contract, $12 million payable on closing. The third slide displayed the server room access log, Marvin Chen's badge. 1:47 in the morning, 3 days after Chen's termination. The stolen Whitewater valuation record modeled the exact internal numbers Coastline used for their lowball bid. Roland stood up so fast his chair slammed into the credenza behind him. Where did you get this information? This is a confidential breach of security protocols. This is from a party with lawful credentialed access approved by our general counsel, I said. Reported to me in my capacity as chief executive and to legal as a fiduciary disclosure. The 2 directors, who had been leaning toward Roland, stared down at the table. One of them, a former federal prosecutor named Tom Hadley, asked for a short recess. Joanna formally moved to start an internal investigation under Section 4 of our corporate bylaws. The motion carried 6-1. Roland was the only opponent. Roland was suspended from his chief operating officer duties pending the investigation. Effective immediately. He quietly gathered his laptop, his portfolio, and his coffee cup. He did not look at anyone on his way out. The meeting never formally adjourned. It simply dissolved. Eleanor Whitcomb did not stand up to leave. She was the oldest director on the board, the only woman besides me. And she had served on the Whitewater Advisory Council 20 years ago when it was still a Navy spin-off. She waited until the room emptied. Margot, sit down for a moment. I sat. You had help. I have done this work for 40 years. The man who built that case is not your employee. No, he is Whitewater. Eleanor nodded slowly, the way people do when everything finally clicks into the shape they always knew it had. Then the acquisition just changed hands. It is no longer ours to decide. It is his. That afternoon I did not go down to the lobby. I didn't look for Hudson. I simply let the day pass, returning phone calls. I drafted a memo to staff, waiting. At 6 in the evening there was a knock at my door. Hudson walked in. For once he wasn't wearing his usual gray polo. He was wearing a dark blue button-down shirt and no badge. He set a folder on my desk offering to sell Whitewater systems to Ellery Maritime at my original bid price. No adjustments. I opened the folder. The numbers were exactly what I had offered 6 months ago. Why the original price? You could ask for more because you took it to the board alone, he said. You didn't need me to raise the price to prove anything. I read the cover page. I read the term sheet, picked up my pen and signed on the line. My hand was steady. When I pushed the folder back across the desk, my fingers brushed his for half a second. Neither of us pulled away. Saturday morning. I had asked them to come at 9. I hadn't given a reason. I hadn't mentioned brunch. I only said if they were free, I'd be at the house. My house on Trad Street was quite small for the neighborhood. 3 stories, narrow lot, and an iron gate. My back courtyard garden had a massive magnolia tree. I was told it was older than the Civil War. Since Caroline died, I had never invited anyone here except family. Wynne was up at 7, already dressed. She insisted we use the good plates, so the table was set. Hudson and Poppy arrived just after 5. Hudson handed me a small jar of local honey without a word. Poppy stood in the doorway, clutching a sketchbook, watching Wynne the way she had watched me in the workshop. Wynne gently pulled Poppy by the wrist into the kitchen. Within 30 seconds, the girls were at the breakfast table, sharing a huge sheet of butcher paper and a fistful of markers. They drew cargo ships, cranes, and seagulls, with a tiny mermaid in the corner from Win. I stood at the stove making pancakes. I made 2 lopsided pancakes for Poppy shaped like tiny boats. The second boat had a dent on its side because I flipped it too early. Poppy inspected her plate, nodded once, and deemed them pretty. Hudson leaned against the counter holding a coffee mug, quietly watching us with steady, knowing eyes. When the girls finally finished and ran out to feed the courtyard birds, the kitchen fell quiet and he spoke. "Do you know why I said yes when you asked us here?" For Poppy, he shook his head. "Because you made pancakes for my daughter before you made them for your niece." I froze with the spatula in my hand. I hadn't even realized I did that. It was just dinked. He said, "In 3 years I have not let anyone into Poppy's kitchen. Today I let her into yours." He paused. "That is how I say it." I set the spatula down on the counter, completely disarmed by his words. I turned to face him, standing only 2 steps apart in my small kitchen. Morning light washed over the counter between us. I spoke softly, feeling completely exposed. "In the lobby that day I asked that question to mock you. I am sorry, I know," he said. And I answered the way I did because I had not told myself the truth in 36 months. "You do not need to apologize for the question. But you can apologize for the tone." I nodded. "I'm sorry for the tone." He nodded. Suddenly the back door banged open. Win ran in first, completely breathless, holding up a tiny shell she had unearthed under the magnolia tree. Poppy was right behind her, beaming. Our quiet moment passed, but it stayed with me. When they were leaving, Poppy turned at the gate and sprinted back up the path. She hugged me tightly around the waist, said nothing, and ran back to the car. Hudson stood by his open car door, looking back across the courtyard at me. "Come out to the workshop next Saturday, yes." He didn't ask what time, and I didn't ask what to bring, just 2 weeks. On Tuesday, Roland Pace was indicted on 3 federal wire fraud charges: breach of fiduciary duty and hacking into a secured computer system. The local papers ran a brief 4-paragraph story deep in the business section. By that afternoon, the Wall Street Journal picked up the story with more detail. On Monday, Ellery Maritime officially announced we had closed the Whitewater acquisition. Our stock ticked up 41 cents on the news. The board met in a brief executive session. They voted unanimously to extend my CEO contract for 5 more years and make Eleanor our new chairman. Margot did not throw a party. She sent no company-wide email to celebrate the win. She handwrote 3 short thank you notes, sending one to Joanna Reeve, one to Eleanor Whitcomb, and one to the night cleaning crew on the 18th floor. She left them in interoffice envelopes and headed home at 5 o'clock, her earliest exit in months. By Friday evening, she was driving out to Sham Creek. Hudson was closing up the workshop for the night as her tires crunched onto the gravel. Poppy was not there. Her grandmother, Mara's mother, who lived 10 minutes away and had been the one constant in Hudson's life for 3 years, had her for the weekend. Hudson finished locking up. They strolled together down the boardwalk, running behind the busy seafood restaurants. Glows from the dockside string lights turned the dark water below to black and gold. They did not hold hands, yet their steps matched perfectly without even trying. They talked about Poppy and they talked about Win. They debated if the 2 girls should share a 2nd-grade classroom next year, or whether it was better to keep them in separate classrooms and just meet in the cafeteria. They never mentioned the corporate takeover. They did not speak of the office lobby. Hudson paused at the very end of the dock, gazing out at the twinkling boat lights. The wind rattled the rigging. "Do you regret asking the question?" Margot paused, letting the silence settle before replying, "No. If I had not asked, you never would have answered. And if you had not answered, I would never have searched for the real you." He nodded. "When Mara died, I believed I would never answer that question seriously again. I only gave you that answer as a joke, just to get you to stop asking." He paused, but the second the words left my mouth, I knew it was no joke. Margot kept quiet, simply standing close beside him at the edge of the dark water. Her shoulder hovered mere inches from his, almost touching but not quite. Driving back over the Ravenel Bridge, she watched the massive cables glowing against the night sky. She finally understood a truth she could never vocalize, but could see with absolute clarity. She did not need to conquer the corporate board anymore to feel worthy. Yet she had spent her entire life chasing those victories just to feel complete. That had always been the price of her executive seat. She lowered the window. As the salty ocean air rushed in, she drove the remaining miles with the window wide open. 6 weeks later, Monday morning. 7:40 a.m. in the lobby of Ellery Maritime. The polished marble floor gleamed in the early sun streaming through the tall eastern windows. A morning guard sat at the security desk, nose buried in a paperback. Nobody else had arrived yet. Margot entered through the revolving door, her coat draped over her arm, carrying 2 warm paper coffee cups. Crossing the marble, her heels clicked much softer than they had on the day this all started. Hudson stood in the very same spot he occupied near the desk on their first day. He was no longer wearing the faded gray polo. He wore a sharp dark blue shirt, jacket unbuttoned, sporting an enamel lapel pin and a new badge reading H. Vale, Senior Advisor for Whitewater Integration. Margot paused exactly 3 feet away, maintaining that same distance. She set one of the warm cups on the counter, sliding it gently toward him across the polished wood. She looked at him, paused a second, then spoke softly. "I didn't mean to be sharp this time. There was no corporate game to win." "So, when was your last date?" I teased, but Hudson didn't flinch or look away. He turned to face me fully. "Tonight," he said. I slowly nodded. 7 o'clock, Husk Restaurant. I already made our reservation. His expression changed, not with surprise, but with the sudden realization that I truly understood him before he even spoke. "When did you book the table?" I asked. "Last Friday," he said. "How did you know I would say yes?" "I didn't," he admitted. "I booked it anyway." He lifted his coffee cup, holding my gaze. We stood there for a few seconds in the empty lobby, morning light warming us through the tall glass. Neither of us moved. Outside on Meeting Street, a delivery truck idled and then rumbled away. The guard turned a page in his paperback novel. He briefly glanced up. He nodded at both of us, completely unaware of the sudden shift between us. He went back to reading. I turned then, walking toward my private elevator bank. Halfway across the marble lobby, I stopped. I turned back just a fraction. 7 o'clock, he nodded. 7. I kept walking, refusing to look back again. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside and they closed. I knew Hudson was still standing in the middle of that empty lobby, his warm coffee cup in hand. I picture him letting out a long, slow breath, not smiling but exhaling completely. The kind of breath you release when you realize you have been holding it in for years. For 3 years he had walked to that security desk, setting his cup down daily. He would sign in, pick the cup back up and ride the freight elevator upstairs to the temporary offices where his integration team spent their long days. Neither of us had been looking for love. Neither of us was ready for this. Yet on a quiet Monday morning in our lobby we finally were.